Welcome to 3 Books with Neil Pasricha, where each chapter we uncover and discuss the 3 most formative books of an inspiring individual. We believe books change lives, and that's why we are the only podcast in the world by and for book lovers, writers, makers, sellers, and librarians. Thanks so much for joining us. Look up to the sky, everybody, and when it's a full moon or when it's a new moon, you can be sure that there is a new episode, a new chapter of 3 Books. That's right, we are deciding to publish this podcast on the Lunar Calendar. Why? Well, why not? You know, the Gregorian calendar, the calendar we all use and know and love, is only 500 years old. But the Lunar Calendar, according to a lot of sources on the internet, is around 30,000 years old. We knew how to measure time by the moon before we knew to add a date on February every 4 years. I feel like there is a sense of groundedness and a sense of contentment that comes with the lunar calendar. When you look up to the sky and it's a brand new full moon, on the actual minute, that's exactly when we'll drop a new episode. Or it's a brand new new moon. Again, we'll drop an episode right then on the minute. We're going to drop them on the minute in Eastern time. That's because Toronto, where I am based, is in Eastern time. But, whether you're in China, whether you're in India, whether you're on the West Coast of North America, that moon should still look pretty full or pretty new to you. So, with that, I want to welcome you to Chapter 3, where I had the great privilege and pleasure of sitting down with the one and only Seth Godin. When you type in Seth into Google, guess who pops up first? That's right, Seth Godin. And it's not really a surprise. The man is a phenomenon. I mean, he has published mega bestseller after mega bestseller. I'm talking about Purple Cow. I'm talking about Tribes. I'm talking about Linchpin. He has a blog that is updated nearly every day with something always sort of insightful and pithy and strategic, a lens of looking at the world in a new light. He is the host of a great new podcast called Akimbo, which I'm becoming slowly addicted to. And he was kind enough to welcome me into his office. So I flew to New York City from Edmonton through a snowstorm, was able to grab a car to go to Yonkers, New York, because there are no hotels in Hastings-On-Hudson where he lives and works. So I stayed in nearby Yonkers. In the morning, I got up, I took an Uber over to Hastings-on-Hudson. The Uber driver told me there is no such place as Hastings-on-Hudson. I was like, are you sure? Because I think Seth Godin works there. And he's like, no, I don't think so. And I'm like, well, just take me to the address. And we got there. And sure enough, in the flesh, Seth invited me into his incredible office. You'll hear us talking about that at the beginning. And he proceeded to just blow my mind with bomb after bomb after bomb of just insightful thoughts about his 3 most formative books and the incredible sort of the sort of connective tissue that links those books together with who he is today and what he writes about today, but also some insightful points on the world. I was truly blown away with, honestly, what his 3 books even were. So wait till you hear the titles. They may be familiar to you. They were not all familiar to me. And I had to kind of go back and really educate myself to get ready for this interview. And I was surprised and stumped by a lot of the things he said. He does something really interesting in his acknowledgments on the book Linchpin, and I asked him about that, and his answer sort of surprised me. Where he thought the book industry was going after 500 years since the printing press came out also surprised me and kind of caught me off guard. I can't tell you how excited I was to do this interview and how powerful I think his words and messages are. I hope you enjoy Chapter 3 of 3 Books with the one and only Seth Godin.
You pressed it twice.
I just pressed it twice, yeah. You told me about that, and I pressed it once, and nothing happened. I imagine that happens sometimes. People press it once, and then nothing goes. Thank you for inviting me into your...
It's a pleasure. You've crossed international boundaries.
I have. You call this an office... Do you call this an office? Or
Yeah.
I'm in a very unique space right now.
It's my studio.
I see maps. I see a studio. That's a great word. I see bookshelves. I see a lot of framed beautiful pictures on the wall, a lot of AV stuff. This is a really creative space. Is that a fair word?
It is. Right. It has a patina, and at this point, the patina has a patina.
Can you define patina?
It's sort of the burnished, rough, scummy stuff that builds over time on the outside of just about anything. So you don't want a patina on something beautiful, except if it's a cast iron skillet or a library. Those should have patinas.
Oh, that's beautiful. I was just, as we were sitting down and plugging in here, I was just telling you the story about how I'm really excited to meet you and a bit nervous because I looked back at my first email to you in 2010. I asked you sort of weirdly for a blurb for the Book of Esther. I mean, you did something no one else did, which is replied no. Everyone else either replied yes or did not reply. And I thought it'd be interesting to say, when the easy way out is to say nothing, why do you always choose to say no?
Well, my relationship with email is a little tortured. I was one of the people who helped invent commercial email as an actual thing. So I've been punished since then. I've answered, by my count, 142,000 emails in the last 20 years. If I'm answering email, I'm not doing my real work. So it's a crutch. And I can get home at the end of the day and think I had a good day, but realize that all I did was answer 400 emails. So I try very hard not to encourage people to send me email. But I also believe that not answering an honest, unique, personal email from a real human is rude. And I try to get back to people, but I don't think I have an obligation to do what they asked me to do just because they sent me an email. And so in your case, I don't remember our exchange from 8 years ago, but my guess
it's buried in the 142,000.
Exactly. But my guess is that I was really busy and couldn't do it justice, and said, I'm sorry, but I don't think I just wrote back the word no. That would not be like me.
No, you know what you did right, and actually gave me a lot of inspiration. You said, nice job on the cover. And then you also said, a little later when I emailed you, you said, don't sweat the book launch. It's a process, not an event.
Correct.
Which I held on to as I surfed the waves of the ups and downs of landing a tenacious spot and missing a...
And you've proven something, though. You proved that without getting picked by the magic genies in the sky, it's possible with generosity and persistence to write a best-selling book. And it's not easy or likely, but it's possible, and you did it. Congratulations.
Thank you, Seth. It's a privilege to talk to you about books. I tried to collect a few quotes you have said about books. I'm going to try my best to say some of these as a bit of a patina onto this episode, if I could. And they are, here's a few. And because of course you started your career in book packaging, and have written, by my count, 18 books, if that's right.
It's hard to count. There's 18 bestsellers that I count. There were 120 books I did before that as a book packager. There have been ebooks and special project books, and so I'm not counting.
Okay, I wrote dozens originally, and then I heard 18 and a few other references points. But you wrote, here's a few things you said. You said, books are a souvenir of an idea.
Yeah.
Which I love. I also wrote this note down that when you moved into this office, you said, I gave up 3,000 books when I moved in here and I miss them every day.
That's true. It was a bad mistake, but I had no choice because there's not enough room for 3,000 more books.
Where'd they go?
Well, so here's some interesting things about books. I have lost 15 Kindles over the years. I leave them on airplanes, like many people. Not once has someone found it and bought more books with my Kindle. Not once.
Oh, I mean, how would you? Oh, so you can see.
You can see every time you buy a book from Amazon, they send you a note, and I can see I have no books that I didn't buy, right? So books don't have value like they used to. And so I wanted to give away these books because when I was a book packager, if I was going to do a book on a topic, I would go to the bookstore and buy every single book on the topic. That was the only place to get data.
Yeah.
So, when I worked on a thing with Prodigy, we did a thing about the Academy Awards. So I had 9 books on the Academy Awards and then 12 books on this and 18 books on this. So I thought, great, I'll call up a bunch of used bookstores and say, come take this stuff away and pay me $100. No one wanted my pristine quality reference book collection. So I ended up running an ad on Craigslist to give them away. And it took 9 different people coming to take these for free before I could finally get rid of all of them. And the near miss that happened was I got a note 3 weeks later from somebody, a stranger. And he said, I just want to give you a heads up. I bought a used book on Amazon, and on the cover page, the author had inscribed the book to you. So what had happened was I had given away this author's book, and somebody else had bought the book. And if the author had found out, he would have been so insulted. Mm-hmm. Phew, the secret's safe with me. I'm not telling.
We're not recording this or anything.
But books are magical. They're souvenirs. They remind us of a thing. So the reason I missed those 3,000 books is not because I can't look up the information, because of course I can. It's because when I see them here in front of me, the spines, I remember when I read them. I remember the impact they had on me. I remember what it stood for at that moment. And that experience of remembering it isn't as good as reading it again, but it's close.
That's amazing. It reminds me of the scene in High Fidelity where somebody asked the John Cusack character, how do you organize your records? And he says, chronologically. And it's just like the beautiful memory of all his relationships and all his adolescence. No, is there a paradox there? You know, you said you have this love for books, which we love on this show. You've also said books are like old friends. Books are the only form of media that can reliably be created by one person and stand the test of time. And then you also just described how giving away Seth Godin's 2,000 book collection took 9 strangers and ultimately got hawked online. Why the disparity between the value of this sacred text and medium and the seeming shoulder shrug of society?
Because it's over. After 500 years, it's over. And it's never coming back. And I wish I could tell you it was coming back. But, you know, vinyl, I have a vinyl collection. Vinyl sales go up every year. But that's like saying, you know, they grow more corn in the Yukon than they did last year. It's on the tiniest possible base. And
it's a great metaphor.
Right? And so the vibrancy of the publishing industry is gone. The reason is that book publishers think their customers are bookstores. Everything in the book publishing industry is organized around the bookstore. The simplest proof is, tell me the 800 number of Random House. They don't have one. Mm-hmm. They don't want the readers to call them. Every book publisher knows how to reach, every bookstore knows how to reach them, but not the public. They're not for the public. Well, that worked great for 500 years, but now the bookstores are going away. And they're going away because the idea of a giant warehouse filled with inventory that turns once a year at most economically doesn't work. And once the bookstore goes away, books aren't going to be the same sort of transaction that they used to be, and libraries aren't going to feel the same way. And an entire generation is coming up that doesn't have the same relationship with books that you and I do. The new data from the Pew Charitable Trust says a lot of things are stable, but if you read into the data, you realize 1/3 of the people in the United States didn't read a single book last year. Mm-hmm. Not one.
And you said 1/3. Whereas if you've said 2/3, I wouldn't have even been surprised.
Right. Well, that's hardly when you realize that 1 million books are published a year for a country with 300 million people, do the math. It's really hard for me to visualize how to get books on paper to become the vibrant thing they used to be.
Yeah. And at the same time, we've got rising, higher than ever literacy rates around the world, higher than ever education rates around the world, higher than ever total high-level book sales, I believe, and maybe it's the corn analogy, but the total number of books sold overall over the world is increasing.
That. Sure.
And I've heard that of all forms of medium compared to film, music, television, books are the only one where the percent analog is not declining precipitously, but in fact may actually be returning, or not returning, but going back up. So a lot of people have lost 15 Kindles or had one that they cracked on a trip to Croatia, like me. Like I rolled over it with 20 pages left in the Hunger Games, and I was distraught because I couldn't find an English Hunger Games anywhere in Rovinj or Hvar or wherever I was in Croatia. So, and then I was like, you know what? I think I'll just stick with the book. Like I had to download the app and like pay some data. So there's this maybe return. So there's another, not paradox, but there's another, like the downside. And here we are here I am running a books podcast with a phone number. I have a phone number. It's 1-833-READ-A-LOT. So we've booked the number. You call us. Because we're pre-recording on this, of course, we'll play voicemails from people as they listen to our show. And I'm also going to reveal something now. This will be the first episode to reveal this. So if you're listening in, you'll hear this for the first time. We are also on, when you call this number, and you're hearing this in the middle of an episode on purpose, there will be a password and an instruction on the voicemail. That will be the only way you can join our fan club. It's a 100% analog with an address that you can mail.
Wow.
You can mail a check or money order to, and you will receive our newsletter. There's no way on or off the list other than purely analog.
Go, go, go.
Yeah, we're trying. So books. Now, this is a podcast about books with that context set.
I started with such a downer. I'm sorry.
Well, I feel both enlightened and disheartened, but I also feel like one of the values of this show is curation, because in an era of infinite choice, at 3 Books, we believe the value of curated lists skyrockets.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, can I ask before we get into 3 Books, what's a curated list or two you might love or refer to for references for you on reading or the like? Do you have a person or a place that you check for curation?
BoingBoing is a fantastic blog. Mark Frauenfelder and Cory Doctorow, and then Kevin Kelly shows up now and then on some other projects, Cool Tools. So Kevin Kelly was one of the founding editors of the Whole Earth Catalog, founding editor of Wired Magazine, and he's been at this for a long time. If Kevin writes a book, I read it. If Kevin recommends a book, I get it. Mark Frauenfelder has tastes similar to mine on certain things Cory does. So there are...
How do you say... can you say his last name or spell it for us?
Frauenfelder.
Okay.
There's just so many F's and vowels.
We'll put it in the show notes so we can catch that.
So they're a reliable source for me because I'm constantly sucking in information. I'm like a whale with the plankton, and some of it comes in. Also, I get 2 or 3 books in the mail every day because people think blurbs help. They don't. And so I'm reading those. I have plenty of books in my life. Finding, and later I'll talk about a couple books that I discovered that amazed me that I hadn't known about them. So yes, there's still great books out there. And the one thing I want to mention, to come back to the point you made earlier, Amazon has had a magnificent impact on availability of books. That I buy maybe 10 times as many books a year as I did before Amazon, because that click and buy and click and buy and click and buy.
Yeah.
So that has made a huge difference. The challenge we have is that the long tail is fragile, and if the short head goes away, it's really hard to keep the long tail going. The Long Tail is a brilliant book by Chris Anderson, and basically what it points out is half of the books sold on Amazon have never been in a bookstore. Half. Half of the movies that Netflix used to rent when Blockbuster was in business were never once in a Blockbuster. Half. That number sticks over and over again. iTunes Store. Half of the music sold on iTunes was never carried in a record store ever. The long tail is where the Jamaican polka music lives. The long tail is where, an obscure biography of an obscure Civil War hero lives. And what Amazon did was expose the long tail to anyone who was looking for it. And so if you're going to get a massive boost from that. The challenge we have going forward is, books used to live on the New York Times bestseller list in the 60s for 30 or 40 weeks in a row. And now they live for 2 on average. And so you get all this churn.
With a dagger beside them sometimes.
The what?
Sometimes with the dagger beside them.
Those don't count, right? And
the bulk sales dagger.
So you got all this churn, and that means that it's really rare that all of us are reading the same thing. And because not a lot of people are reading the same thing, we're not talking about it. Because we're not talking about it, it's hard to bring other people along. And because publishers can't rely on the next To Kill a Mockingbird, because there isn't going to be a next To Kill a Mockingbird, they don't have the money to pay for the next 100 things that may or may not work. And so you see this ratchet going in the wrong direction now. So throughout my lifetime, there's still going to be books and book publishers. But as someone who grew up, my first book was 86. I've been doing this a really long time. And you can feel the stuttering happening, and I don't see the path. So I don't want to be a downer on this because books matter. And if people are listening to this, I'm with you. But we started talking about the industry, so there you go.
No, I love that. And it begs the question, two things that pop up. One is, why don't blurbs matter? Which I'd love to hear your thought on quickly. And then also, you've painted a portrait for us, which I love. And can you extend that into the future? What does that look like when my little kids are my age?
Right.
There's a stuttering, and then sometimes there's a big breath or a big change. Are you feeling any of that coming?
Okay, so why don't blurbs matter? The author gets something priceless from a blurb. They get confidence. I remember the day Tom Peters sent me the blurb for a book I did called Guerrilla Marketing Yourself. And that's why I write blurbs, because it mattered so much to me that day. But I have published books with 0 blurbs on them, and I have published books with blurbs on them, and there's no impact one way or the other. And most honest book publishers will tell you that human beings don't buy a book because on the back, Malcolm Gladwell liked Freakonomics. That's not why Freakonomics sold. So what's really happening is the author saying, will you validate me? And I want to validate people, and I believe most books are worth more than they cost. So I'm not worried that someone's going to say, wait a minute, this book only had $50 worth of ideas in it and I only paid $18. How dare you blurb it? But I'm not going to be one of those people who say, tell me what you want the blurb to say and I'll approve it.
Right.
I read every book I blurb, every single one. And I think it matters to be able to stand for something. So people may not have my taste, but at least they know I took the time to read it. So yes, blurbs don't matter. And in a self-publishing world, there's so many people now wanting a blurb for this and this and this. It's impossible to keep up. So I feel terrible about that.
No, I get it. By the way, my favorite blurb of all time is on the back of Bossy Pants by Tina Fey, which is totally worth it, signed Trees.
Yes, there she goes. Well done. So what about our kids? I think that because we're living in it, like the goldfish living in the water, we don't notice the water. What we're living in is the typical person is spending 2 to 6 hours a day on a mobile device that they didn't used to spend.
They say 5 years ago was 18 minutes a day.
Yeah. And so, the iPhone, the single most profitable consumer product in the history of the world, has also transformed everything. And what we know is that people rarely read a book in iBooks because you're one click away from checking your email. And if you have a choice between reading one more page and checking your email, you check your email. So one of the nice things about the Kindle is you can't check your email on the Kindle. So at least it's a little immersive. But I think what happens is we don't have a poetry shortage. There's plenty of poetry, but there's no industry for poetry. And I think that books go in that direction. That we're not going to run out of people writing, but the industry, 20 years from now, it's hard for me to visualize how it works.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to put it, and brings up so many interesting thoughts. People often ask me, "Hey, why on 3 books do you have no ads? Do you have no sponsors? Do you purposefully not court these people? Do you purposely avoid them?" And I say, well, because when you open a book, there's no ad, and when you open a book, there's no sponsor. And I want to create the theater of the mind effect. That's why we're 2 years as we're recording right now, because I want it to feel like a special place. And I don't want you to be able to check your email, and I don't want you to be able to think about MeUndies. And no, they did not pay for me to say that right now. It's just ingrained in my head from every other podcast. So that's why I don't have ads on the show. Can we jump into your beautifully articulated, to me, 3 most formative books? I'm so excited to say them. I thought what we would do is, if you don't mind, Seth, is I'll just do like the 30-second overview of them for the listeners to have a bit of context on like a book published date and stuff like that. And then I'll ask you to tell us about your relationship with them. So the first book is called The Book of Esther, or as I was saying it the whole time, The Book of EST in my head. by Luke Reinhardt. There's a theater of the mind effect right there.
Yep.
Forward by Werner Erhardt. And it's an important forward because this book was published in 1976 by Holt, Reinhardt, and Winston. It was written by, as I mentioned, Luke Reinhardt, but that turns out to be the pen name of George Cockcroft, who most famously wrote the book The Dice Man in 1971. This book is a fictional account of the 4-day training created by Werner Erhardt, or Erhardt Seminars training, throughout the 70s, which it sounds like up to 1 million people took. That training ultimately became Landmark Education, which some people will have heard of in 1991, and ultimately turned into Landmark Worldwide, which is a multi-million-dollar company today with 500 employees. This book is unique, Seth, because it has a first-person butt-in-seat view of the high-intensity, highly emotional 4-day EST training, or EST training. However,
I think you're supposed to say EST.
Oh, thank you for finally clarifying that to me in my head. 4-day EST training. So please tell us about your relationship with the Book of Esther.
All right. Well, let me preface this a little bit by saying there are a lot of people who don't like self-help books. And there are a lot of people who would like to criticize people like me for writing self-help books. I think there's almost no such thing as self-help. Or actually, I should say it the opposite way. I think almost all help is self-help. If you are drowning, it's really unlikely that someone will pick you up and take you out of the water. It is way more likely that someone will throw you a life buoy or reach out with a long stick or try to help you swim to shore. But if you don't want to do it, you're probably not going to get saved. And that what we seek to do when we want to do better, when we want to feel better, when we want to make a better difference, is help ourselves, is commit to moving forward. And that all a self-help book does, if it's doing a good job, is open the door for you to fix yourself. That the author can't fix you, that a diet book can't make you skinny, and a book on goal setting can't make you successful. What it can do is open the door. And so if you say, I don't like self-help books, they're always trying to do this and this and this, you might be saying, well, actually, I don't want to help myself get out of this spot I'm in because I'm comfortable being unhappy. I'm comfortable being stuck. And that the problem with reading a book like this is it might work. And if it works, then I'll have to change. And if I change, that might be uncomfortable. So with that preface, my story is that I was unsuccessful and unhappy a few years after that book came out, 1979, 1980 in college, that I had a narrative in my head that things weren't working. And every time something didn't work, I would go, oh, there it goes again. And it was a schlemiel schlemazel, bucket of water on the head kind of thing. I was Laurel and Hardy all in one. And I had an RA in my dorm, the resident director, who had been to the EST training.
Oh, interesting. Sorry, where was the college?
In Boston.
You're in Boston, yeah.
Yeah, not Harvard, for people who didn't get into Harvard. And she and her husband were constantly pushing people like me to go take EST. Therefore, I didn't want to do it because it felt really culty. And the way EST worked was it was expensive, not by today's standards, but in those days. You went for 15 hours on Saturday and 15 hours on Sunday. And then and they wouldn't let you take a bathroom break. They wouldn't let you take a water break, and you didn't get to eat very much. And then there'd be 2 days off. And then Wednesday night, you'd go back for 2 or 3 hours. And then Thursday and Friday, you'd have time off. And then another weekend also of 13 hours a day. It was this grueling brainwashing thing. And I'm like, I'm not going to this. I'm not going to this for 100 different reasons. No. So I end up...
And you're shilling. I mean, the book refers to it being $250 in 70s dollars.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So it was expensive. But also, just the very culty way the whole thing was presented was not my thing. And so I went to visit my sister in North Carolina, which is a long drive from Boston. And I did a ride share, so someone came with me, and this person who was with me was pretty depressive. And so there I am in the car with my ADD looking around trying for information, and the only thing to do is talk to this person who's not very happy. I'm not very happy. And I'm driving for, 11 hours to North Carolina. And I get to North Carolina, hang out with my sister for a few hours. But she's got friends, so she goes to hang out with her friends. What am I going to do?
She leaves you immediately.
And so I she was at Duke, and I go to they had in the middle of this beautiful campus, a used book sale. And I'm walking up and down the used book sale, because even then I love bookstores. And I see this book, the Book of Esther. And I say to myself, wow, a used book, $2. I'll read the book. I won't have to go to the big cult training. Problem solved. Okay. So the reason I suggested this book for one of the 3 books I want to talk about is this. On every single page of this book, without a doubt, there is nonsense. The theories, nonsense. The approaches, manipulative. I am not standing behind 96% of the things that are in this book. However, what Luke, or whatever the person's real name is, did,
George,
that I have
Cockcroft.
almost never seen occur in a book, is in a nonfiction book, he brought me there. And partly it was because I had been driving, and partly because I was where I was in my brain, but I was there. I experienced the thing, and I sat and I read it and I read it, and I probably missed going to dinner with my sister. I don't remember that part. There were moments that I was in tears. I was there. And that was a miracle that you could do that in a book. And I am not exaggerating, that my life changed that day. I got all the stuff that Est was trying to get people to get from reading that book. So I didn't have to go. I didn't have to become part of a cult. And I will tell you, because I studied philosophy and brain science, and I've been paying attention ever since, there's a lot of stuff in there that's a germ of a truth, but most of it's surrounded by nonsense. So the part where they read other people's minds, this is nonsense. Do not say I thought it was a good idea, because I didn't. But I will tell
lot of
you,
all cap screaming, a lot of swearing, a lot of wrestling.
Well, yeah, because they're brainwashing people, and that's understandable, right? But the punchline, though, is it's the best kind of self-help, because all he did was open the door for me, and I was ready. And if I had read that book a year earlier, it might not have made a difference. And if I had read it a year later, it might have been too late. But the door was open, and I said, you know what? Your problem is not the outside world. Your problem is the story you're telling yourself about the outside world. And that story is a choice. And if you're not happy with the story, tell yourself another story. Period. That's simple. And most people will hear what I just said and not change anything.
Can you say it again? Because you said your life changed that day, and you just summarized it beautifully.
Yeah, well, because I'd been telling myself a story that made me unhappy. And if I wasn't happy with that story, I should tell myself a different story. The outside world wasn't the problem. I mean, I won the birthday lottery. I grew up with great parents, upper middle class, with privilege, going to a famous college, and I was healthy. So every story I was telling myself was this made up story that I didn't have to tell myself. I could have told myself a different story. And that choice is at the heart of almost every self-help book. And it's at the heart of what a nonfiction author has the chance to do, which is use words. Now notice when you read a book, the voice is your voice. Not true when you listen to an audiobook. Your voice in your head saying something that you didn't believe until you read it. And maybe, just maybe, the author can use the tension and the leverage and the moment to create a little bit of magic that gets you to open a door you could have opened all along. And I don't reread that book very often. I reread it last week, and I agree with myself. I agree that most of what actually happened in that hotel room was nonsense, and I'm glad I wasn't there, because I wouldn't have stood for it. But it worked on me, and it won't work on everybody. But that's not my point. My point is all of us could tell ourselves a better story.
Mm-hmm. You're in North Carolina. Your sister missed dinner with you, or you'd missed it with her. But either way, you read this book, which only has 4 chapters in it. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4.
But they're long chapters, to be fair.
And I guess that mimics the days themselves. Right. You said 15 hours in a hotel room, depending how fast you read. So you finish the book. It sucked you in, and it sucked me in. And I had never heard of it until you suggested it, and I was captivated by this book. I have so many notes. I've put them aside from the book. And what happened after that? So you said everything changed.
My life completely changed.
Yeah.
I stopped whining. I stopped looking for reasons to whine. Shortly thereafter, I applied for an on-campus job and became co-founder of the largest student-run business in the country. with Steve Dennis, and we built it to 400 employees. There were only 4,000 students at Tufts, so 10% of the people were temporary employees of ours. We started a travel agency and a ticket bureau and a concert agency and a coffee shop and a laundry service and a birthday cake service. Every week or two, we started a new business. And I probably started standing an inch taller as I walked through the world. The place in Canada that I used to go in the summer camp I used to work, that summer was transformative for me. I mean, so many things happened because I chose to tell myself a different story. Shortly after that, I met the woman who became my wife, which was a great decision on my part. And so all of those factors happened not because the outside world got better, but because I chose to tell myself a different story.
Oh, that is so beautiful. Seth, I love that. And it's the definition of formative, right? It is so eloquent how you described it. I've pulled a few quotes up from the book. I'm just going to read 2 or 3 of them to you. If they jog a thought or reaction, please feel free to share. If not, no problem. But there are a few things that stuck out to me. Page 51. The only way to experience something is to get in touch with it. It's a totally impossible paradox. If you fully experience something, then the experience will disappear and you'll have a new one.
Okay, so what Werner did was grab from Buddhism, smart, Scientology, not so smart, and a bunch of other spiritual traditions, and then put some words on top of them. So what does it mean for something to be an experience? What does it mean for something to be a memory? If you think back to memories from when you were 10 or 15 or 20, you're not actually experiencing those things again. You're telling yourself a story about them. The reason we remember the day before our 12th birthday, but can't remember anything else from being 12, is because we've been telling ourselves that story over and over again. Not because we actually remember that day. We remember the story of that day. So one of the things that we do as humans is memorialize and concretize these stories because they become part of our narrative of who we are. They're a place we go when we want to get to a safe place and not experience the new thing, right? And so if you say, I am scared of spiders, what you're probably saying is, I have a story in my head about my fear of spiders because one time that thing happened. And the theory is that story is getting in the way of you actually being present for the chemicals and the rest of the stuff in your brain of what happens when you see a spider. And if you can just drop the story and experience the emotion, the story is harder and harder to repeat because we don't have that many emotions available to us, maybe a dozen, right? Joy, shame, you can list them. And they're pretty much the same. And so it's our narrative that gets ever more textured and gets us stuck in a corner, as opposed to just drop the narrative, drop the story. And one of the things that's in the book that I just rediscovered, which I didn't notice the first time I read it, gets to this idea of free will. And I've written about it in a couple of my books. And the idea is, then it was a speculation, now it's been proven, that voice in our head, that narrative. We think what happens is it tells us we're going to do something and then we go do it. It tells us we're going to decide to do something. I think I'm going to have chicken for dinner. Mm-hmm. And then we go have chicken for dinner. But in fact, what happens is part of our brain that doesn't have a voice, part of our brain that doesn't know how to make narrative, it decided it a second or two before we made a voice. The voice happens to justify a decision a different part of our brain made. And the obvious evidence of this is every other animal on earth makes decisions, but no other animal on earth has a narrative. The narrative got added evolutionarily millions of years after those animals existed. So we're the same animal as all the other animals, as the fox or the wolf or the bear, but we just put a storytelling Howard Cosell up front. And if that story...
You're touching the front of your head as you said
exactly,
that.
Right up there.
Yeah.
And that storytelling machine happens after the fact. And if it's getting in your way, just don't listen to it and let it chatter, chatter, chatter. But that chatter isn't productive.
Mm-hmm. I'm feeling that so deeply. I so appreciate that beautiful way to say that. My favorite quote from the book came from page 112. It's the last one, and then we'll move to the next book. We're interested in creating the space where you can learn to just be you, just be yourself, and that's all. We don't have any theory about how you ought to be. There's no such thing as the est personality. There's only more aliveness, more joy, more love, and more self-expression. This is not a popular book, Seth. I mean, I went online, I looked at it, I hadn't heard of it. I'm not saying that's not why it's popular, but I looked at the reviews, I looked at the rankings, but it really touched you and it really shaped you. And I found it, I found it very transformative as I read it. How do we look for books that aren't popular to live with more joy, more love, and more self-expression?
All right. Well, first I want to put a small pin here. Just be yourself is nonsense. There's a lot of nonsense in this book. That's an example of nonsense. Okay. That's
my favorite quote.
The thing about Est and Landmark is there's a lot of meta stuff going on. So there are words that are designed to create an experience in your brain to make a different experience happen. But don't judge those words by what they are because they don't make any sense. Okay. What does it mean to just be yourself? So does that mean if you wake up in the morning and decide that you don't want to get dressed, you should just go to work naked? Does it mean if you wake up in the morning and feel like you shouldn't go to work because don't feel like it, you shouldn't go to work? We do stuff all day long that isn't, quote, ourself, that isn't our authentic self. We do it because it works. That's what it means to live in a civilization. That you don't get to punch the guy who cut you off at the taxi line because you feel like it. Oh, just being myself. No, you're not allowed to do that because if you do that, you go to jail.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like the Adam Grant, Brené Brown debate that happened a couple of years ago. And he said, unless you're Oprah, being authentic is terrible advice. And the New York Times op-ed, and Brené Brown wrote criticism of it, but they were talking about different things.
Exactly. Right? So you can take this language and run in all the wrong directions. Some people use it to hide. And so, yes, there is actually an Est and a Landmark personality. I've seen it from people who have been through it. They use certain language that that's just your racket. Or I don't know what your policy is on language here, but I'm quoting the book.
No, you can say anything.
Right.
Yeah,
in the book, throughout the book, they use the word asshole a lot.
Yeah.
Right? So they're doing that to elicit a certain reaction. Mm-hmm. And I
refer to the room of people as assholes from the beginning and throughout the entire book without explaining why.
Right. And it's because they're trying to activate parts of your brain to get you in the game, right? Well, if you understand that you're not reading an engineering manual, but that you're actually engaging in here's the thing about massage. They're doing some interesting research on massage. It turns out that for most people, a very vigorous massage is not as effective as someone who hardly touches you and is just gently stroking you. Because it turns out the somatic experience of having another human being stimulate your biggest organ, your skin, changes the way your brain is telling your nerves to behave. And that we're not actually needing steak and muscle and stuff. That's not what a massage is for most of the time. What it's for is making one reset our electrical chemistry, right? Well, the same thing is true in an experience like this. They only got 4 days to brainwash you. How are they going to do it? And so if anyone reads this book, because I suggested it, I just want to be super clear. Ignore the words, drop the narrative, take the feeling, because the feeling is what they were trying to teach.
Beautiful. Thank you. And we're going to hit on the idea of curation, and we talked about it at the beginning, and we're going to hit on that a little later too. I'd love to transition now to your second book, which you recommended I listen to in audio, and I did, but I also brought the hard copy here, which is See You at the Top by Zig Ziglar. Published in 1976 by Pelican, Zig, who lived from 1926 to 2012, wrote his first book, See You at the Top, at age 50. He was born Hillary Hinton Ziglar, obviously called Zig, in Southeast Alabama in 1926, the 10th of 12 children. Sadly, his father died when he was 6. His younger sister died when he was 7. And later in life, his eldest daughter passed away at a young age as well. He married his wife, Jean, when he was 17 and she was 16, and began doing motivational tours across the U.S. at a later age. He wrote 30 books. See You at the Top is his first. It was rejected by 39 publishers. It's still in print today, and the cover says, 69th printing. It literally says 1,713,000 copies in print. And in case you suspect that such a specific number, kind of like the old Walmart pricing strategy, was like specific to be truthful, no, sure enough, when you open the book, they've got a list of every single printing that the book has done, telling you in every language, every single printing that it's had. So it's like, if you want to check in, check it out. The original title of the book was Biscuits, Fleas, and Pump Handles, but I guess he changed it to See You at the Top. It's dedicated to Sugar Baby, the redhead who has been my wife and life for more than half a century, and the best is yet to come. So, Seth, please tell us about your relationship with See You at the Top.
Oh boy, I have quite a relationship with Zig. I know his son Tom. So shortly after I graduated from college, my dad, who has since passed away, he was listening to a lot of tapes in his car. Some of them I had no patience for. They're political stuff, but I discovered he had this tape from a guy named Zig Ziglar, and it was a sales tape. And I listened to it. And about that time, I realized that it's one thing to tell yourself a better story, that the narrative of possibility is essential. But it's another to keep bootstrapping your way into it, that along the way, we will get disappointed. Along the way, things aren't going to work. And when I started my business in 86, rejection was my middle name. I got 800 rejections in a row from the book industry after my first sale. And
did you say 800 facetiously?
No, it's 800, literally 800, exactly 800, maybe 900. I stopped counting after 800. It was a lot. And, the thing about the book industry in those days was they needed more books. I knew how to make books. You could send someone a book proposal for $1, and if they liked it, they would send you money. So I had book proposals, and they didn't send me money. And it gets personal really fast, because it's not like I'm saying, hey, I have this line of honey. Want to buy a jar of honey? And someone says, I don't like honey. That's not your fault. But if you say, hey, I came up with this great idea for a book. You want to buy it? They say, that's a bad idea. Right? Anyway, I realized that the bad stories were coming back because the world was filling me with bad stories. And the lesson of See You at the Top is not that I agree with Zig's politics, because I didn't. And it's not that I can do his accent. I used to be able to, but I can't anymore.
Can you give us a line?
Not anymore. Okay. But I used to be. I told Zig, we worked together once on stage, but I told him anytime he gets sick or just send me, I can do every one of the stories. But the lesson is this. If you listen 10 times, 20 times, I listened more than 100 to every single one of the tapes. The stories add up. And the voice in your head gets amplified. The voice of possibility, the voice of positivity, the voice of opportunity gets amplified. And the question is, why wouldn't you do that? Right? Why wouldn't you clean out all the noise that's coming from people who are rejecting you, from the media that wants it to be an emergency, the Situation Room? What a ridiculous name for a TV show. Breaking news. Really? We broke the news so many times, it's broken forever. But if you can, on your commute, spend 15 minutes listening to his ridiculous accent and the stories from Yazoo City and about the redhead. She's a decided redhead. I don't know if you know this. One day she just decided to be a redhead. Oh. And you hear about the 50th wedding anniversary. Well, me and the redhead have only been married 32 years, but we heard so much about the 50th, we celebrated it early. And you hear about Johnny, the showologist, and you hear about go lights, not stoplights. Over time, You're not even listening to the words. You're buying into the rhythm of what's going on.
I mean, even the subheadline, the how-to book that gives you a checkup from the neck up to eliminate stinking thinking and avoid hardening of the attitudes.
You can get everything you want if you just help enough other people get what they want. And the picture on the cover is of an arrow, and he built a swimming pool in his backyard in the shape of an arrow.
No way.
Right? And
pointing, I'm assuming, north.
No, I don't know. I don't think it mattered which direction the arrow was pointing. The thing that Zig did, Tom Peters and Zig Ziglar are the reason I get to do what I do for a living. They invented this field of, post-religious, positive, business-oriented evangelism. right? Where you're showing up to a crowd of people in book form or in audio form or on stage, and you're saying to that group, we're in this room together, we're breathing the same air, just for a little while. Suspend your disbelief and come with me to trying on a different set of glasses. And
Rose-colored
glasses. Because it turns out that positive thinking doesn't help you do everything, but it helps you do anything better than negative thinking. And if that's true, and you have the judgment and the discernment to not fool yourself into thinking that just because you did it, it's going to work, then filling yourself with this possibility and generosity pays off. And even if your goal isn't to have a big win at the end, the journey is better. And so I highlighted this because a lot of people, even people who love books, can't read books all the time. But if you can get hooked on audio, and it doesn't have to be Zig, but if you can find that voice that you want to get hooked on, it's priceless. It's literally, I mean, before I met Zig, I probably bought $600 worth of the tapes over the years, and I would have paid $6,000 for those tapes.
I mean, it's a great way to measure how form of a book could be, is that the percent of money you'd give to listen to it backwards. I can actually see Ziglar on selling literally right over your shoulder right now, Seth, on the top left corner there. It reminds me of the opening scene of the movie The Founder. Have you seen it?
Nope.
So it's
the Ray Kroc one.
Yeah, the Ray Kroc movie. And he's a struggling salesman, and he's in this hotel room, and he's kind of like, struggling and all and he puts on this little record. I don't know if it's Zig Ziglar, but it
wasn't Zig.
It's you would know, and it's something motivational,
right?
And of course, the movie follows this incredible trajectory to running McDonald's through questionable means, but it does follow his journey towards success. And you give him credit for that. Interesting, because I would have thought like a Dale Carnegie or that kind of ilk. Started that movement. I'm curious, just for a history lesson for myself.
Well, okay, so in the movie, they're taking the Sinclair Lewis, Elmer Gantry, cynical, we don't like self-help, it's all a con mindset. And
so what was that word you just mentioned?
So Sinclair Lewis was an author.
Okay.
And he wrote a book called Elmer Gantry.
Okay.
And Elmer Gantry is about a Zig Ziglar-like character who's a hypocrite who ends up causing a massive tragedy for a lot of people.
Thanks for the context. I didn't know.
And I spent some time with a journalist, and she called me Elmer Gantry. And it was super weird and unsettling because nothing about my work and the output of my work has anything to do with Elmer Gantry. And there are bad people in lots of fields. There are cancer doctors who give people medicine that doesn't make them better. And there are self-help people who are manipulating people who shouldn't be manipulated, who are taking money from people who don't have money to give. They're selling false hope.
Charlatan.
Yeah. And I couldn't differentiate myself more from those people if I tried. I have no patience for them, and I call them out. But there's another side to this, which is that there was a period of time before McDonald's hurt the McDonald brothers founders, and before they lost their way with public nutrition, where they did something extraordinary. And they were able to do something extraordinary because most people couldn't figure out how to be Ray Kroc, but they were happy to own a franchise. Mm-hmm. And the ability to show up in a changing world when you're not sure McDonald's is going to work and bring belief to people who are skeptical opens a door for them to do the work that they're ready to do. And so I don't think it's possible to look at that period of time when Ray was building that part of it before the tragedy of the success happens and say that was bad. I don't think that was bad. I think that if you are willing to live in an industrialized economy, you can accept all the benefits, but one of the costs is that industrialists have to show up in a space where most people don't think it's going to work. Mm. And I'm foreshadowing the next book a little bit, but that act of bringing possibility where others are skeptical, where are you going to get the ammunition to do that? And if you want a guarantee, you'll keep waiting. So part of what we're trying to sell when we sell, quote, self-help is you could help yourself if you wanted to by acting as if. Does that mean that some people are going to show up and act as if and they're fraudsters and they're manipulators and they're liars? Of course, right? I don't approve of those people. But that has nothing to do with this genre. It just has to do with what people are going to do with the tools available. Money is an interesting tool, but some people look at money and become Bernie Madoff, and some people look at money and become Pierre Omidyar.
Bill Gates giving it away, or
right?
whoever, yeah.
So
I don't know who Peter is.
Pierre Omidyar.
Pierre, yeah.
Started eBay.
Oh, okay.
Sold it, well, it went public, and has since invested hundreds of millions of dollars as a philanthropist in social enterprise and made a lot of things better.
It's interesting. You talk about that's a great example and a great history lesson for me. And there's something there about trust. And in this book, he has a quote about trust. Zig talks about trust. He says, "If people like you, they'll listen to you. But if they trust you, they'll do business with you, they will follow you, and they will be loyal to you." I've also heard you interviewed on Jonathan Field's Good Life Project interview, our mutual friend, about how your goal is to scale trust. You said, and you mentioned about how your blog has no ads and you create this wheel of trust with your content. So based on what you said there about the people in the industry that are maybe sometimes giving it a bad name, but also the fact that you and Zig, I think, have a commonality about creating and scaling trust, certainly. How do you measure trust, if I can ask you that? And related, and this is a bit more for me, but how do you think about which lines of your work to monetize and which ones not to?
How do you measure trust? I think if you get too deep into measuring trust, you're going to ruin it. Trust is not just about giving and taking. I think trust is about the story and expectations people have about what you're going to do next. So, do people trust Nike? Well, let's see. Would you give them your life savings for your retirement fund? No, because you don't trust Nike as a financial advisor. On the other hand, if you went to the store and they said, "We have a new brand of Nike sneakers, do you want to buy it?" and they fit, you would trust that those sneakers wouldn't break 10 minutes after you left the store.
I just left my new pair of Nikes outside the store as I came in here.
There you go.
Yeah.
And you might even trust that they would make you run faster at the marathon you're going to enter next week. Right. And there'd be a placebo effect as a result of that trust. And
I was sold on the foam heel pump up,
there
whatever.
You go.
I literally was sold on that. I
there
was
you
like,
go.
This will help boost me as I run.
And so placebos are essential. Placebos aren't just in medicine. Placebos are in every element of our life. That if we believe something is going to work, it is more likely to work. We know this. So I don't want to live in a world without placebos because they're too valuable. But placebos are based on trust. And we see people sometimes tearing this down. So the whole nutritional supplement world where they make it look and feel like it's a pharmaceutical, what they're doing is stealing some trust that we have for chemotherapy drugs and applying them to essential oils that somehow have this magical power. Well, if there's no downside of that because they're not going to hurt us, well then, yeah, I don't mind a little bit of a placebo effect there. So when I think about trust as an author, as someone who's building a business or a school or whatever, is there a placebo present? Meaning, does someone give you the benefit of the doubt where your next project is going to arrive? And does a placebo kick in? Because if you're the source of it, it's likely to work better. And if you look at Zig's history, he was a pot and pan salesman door to door. Secrets of Closing the Sale is not about manipulation. It's about helping people understand the fear that they will feel before they say yes. We feel, you can watch someone's heart rate go up before they buy almost anything that isn't a commodity. And a salesperson's job is to be present with emotion and care to get people over that hump. And after he did that for years and years, and his secret, he was the number 2 or 3 in the country for a while, was every other salesperson would go to a little town, make the 10 easy sales, and then go to the next town. Zig moved in. He took a rooming house and he stayed there. So he made the same 10 easy sales as everybody else, but he stayed there. And he stayed there. And he stayed there. And after the first 10 sales, there'd be a week of nothing. But then the neighbors started to notice that Zig's still here. And then he built trust because Zig's still here. And most of the good stories in Secrets in Closing the Sale are about someone saying to him, yeah, what did Farmer Jones do? Because if Farmer Jones is super conservative, if he didn't buy it, I'm not buying it. So he would stick around long enough to get Farmer Jones. And once he got Farmer Jones to buy the cookware, he'd sell 100 more. And it would take longer than jumping from city to city. But the last 2 weeks were so profitable that was what made him one of the best in the world. So 7,500 blog posts later where I'm not selling anything on the blog, you show up and you show up and you show up. I'm not doing it to manipulate people. I'm doing it because it's my calling, it's my privilege. But it also means that when I do bring something to the world, I get the benefit of the doubt. And that benefit of the doubt, you could call it a brand, but I'd rather call it trust.
Wow. And then how do you think about which lines of work to monetize and which not to? For those like me in a camp where you're growing, you have some lines of business that aren't monetized, some that are. You are giving me your time right now, and it's totally free, unless I'm going to get a bill in the mail 30 days from now. I don't know. But you're giving me that time, and I know how much your time is worth. So like, how do you think about what to monetize, what not to?
It used to be very straightforward. If it was digital, it was free. Because most people don't have a piracy problem, they have an obscurity problem. And if everyone knows your idea, you'll do fine. So digital stuff, take it, and print stuff, that costs money. But as print has become something that a lot of people aren't engaging with, I've shifted it to, if it's based in a community, we're going to charge you for that, because a curated, gated community has people who are committed. And if it's straight up digital, like a podcast, that's free because more people don't cost me more. So if you want to be part of the Alt MBA, if you want to be in the marketing seminar, the two products I spend most of my time on now, they cost money. And the more they cost, the better they work for the people who are in them. Because if you don't pay for it, we have plenty of data on this because we let charities in all the time to various stuff we do. You're way more likely to not contribute.
If you don't pay for it.
If you don't pay for it. And so we're able to build, we have 5,500 or so alumni at the marketing seminar so far.
Are the prices public?
Yeah. So the marketing seminar lists for something like $700 and the Alt MBA costs $3,800. It's not for everyone. I get that. If you can't afford it, I get it. That's why there are 7,000 free blog posts and free ebooks and free videos. Please watch all of it.
Still less than a week and a half of my Harvard MBA.
Exactly. Right. And so I feel very comfortable saying to people, it's not for everyone, but it might be for you. And then I feel very comfortable saying, if I'm talking to a working journalist, of course I'm not going to charge for that. If I can share these ideas with people, I'm not going to get affiliate revenue for this, but I'm not in a hustle. I'm not trying to hustle anybody. It's here, I made this, and maybe you want it.
Interesting. And because I went on this nice little rant earlier about how I have no ads on this podcast. And then a tiny part of my brain niggles whenever I say that, saying like, man, you're really kicking yourself on this one. Like you really should be putting ads, but it's something that I'm still trying to work out. But I'm trying to articulate it so that I keep agreeing with myself.
Well, let me explain why there are no ads in books. Ads are sold on a CPM basis. The M, unfortunately, weirdly, stands for 1,000. So it should be CPT,
Latin?
Roman numerals. Who knows?
Okay.
Cost per 1,000. Well, if you have 1 million subscribers to Good Housekeeping, that's 1,000 thousands. So at Good Housekeeping, full page ad costs $80 1,000, which means a full page ad costs $80,000. That's a good business. But a successful book sells 9,000 copies, 20,000 copies. That's only 20 thousands. So if you're going to sell an ad in that book for $50 1,000, you're only going to make $1,000. That's why there are no ads in books. So the thing about podcasts is if you can get to 1 million listeners, you win. But it's really hard to make a good podcast that gets to 1 million listeners. It's easy to make a sort of scurrilous, topical podcast. Not easy, but that's how you get popular in America. But if you want to make one that you're really proud of, it's hard to get to 1 million. So the only answer is not to have advertisers, it's to have sponsors. And sponsors don't measure audience. Sponsors measure presence. So American Express sponsors the US Open, the tennis tournament. How many people go to the US Open? Not very many. That's okay. Because what American Express needs to do is make sure that Visa doesn't get to sponsor them and MasterCard doesn't get to sponsor them. They own that presence among a small group of people. So if you can find a sponsor, go for it. That's different than finding an advertiser.
I really appreciate the healthy context. It's the story you just told about Zig staying in town for an extra long period of time reminds me of a story from our third book, which is the story of the Amish banker.
Right.
I believe, if I have that right. So it's a guy who's not Amish, staying in an Amish community for a long period of time because he earns the trust of the Amish for their banking needs, which most banks wouldn't do because there's all these rules about giving loans on houses. And I think one of them is you have to have electricity and all this stuff.
Right.
And so the third book, really awkward for me to introduce it considering it's yours, is Linchpin by Seth Godin, published by Portfolio in 2010 with the subheadline, Are You Indispensable? This is a book about you, your choices, your future, and your potential to make a huge difference in whatever field you choose. You wrote in this book, every day I meet people who have so much to give but have been bullied enough or frightened enough to hold it back. It is time to stop complying with the system and draw your own map. You have brilliance in you, your contribution is essential, and the art you create is precious. Only you can do it, and you must. Linchpin is one of your 3 most formative books of your life. Can you tell us about your relationship with this and why it changed your life? As you told me it did.
It did. First of all, there's this weird thing that authors aren't supposed to like their own work. When Tom Cruise goes on The Tonight Show, he talks about the movie Tom Cruise just made. And I devoted a year of my life to making this book. And so if you ask me about books that changed me, yeah, because I read that book for longer than any other person on earth has read it, and any more book, So the transformation.
Sorry. Before you jump into transformations, why is that? So you just said Tom Cruise goes on the
Right.
Tonight Show. He's talking about Mission Impossible 6. They're showing a scene of him riding a torpedo underwater or whatever, chasing a shark, and we all applaud, and it's totally acceptable. That's hilarious. You mentioned that because every industry is like that.
Right.
Why can't? Why? Why the pause? You are the first person to name a book that's your own. I knew you'd have a good reason, and of course, but why?
I think the author has traditionally been held up as someone who is beyond commerce. That the esteemed author got an advance, sat in a garret by herself and typed and doesn't need to worry. And, maybe we'll go to a book signing, but that's because the publisher made her go to a book signing.
Interesting.
And because we've been doing this for 500 years.
Yeah.
And until Hemingway, it was a hobby. That writer's block didn't get invented until the 1800s. There was no writer's block before that. It was, you worked at a day job and then you typed at night, and you weren't saying, I'm a famous author. That was super rare, that for it to be a job. And so the people in book publishing, they get paid almost nothing having graduated from an Ivy League school. They don't have a lot of advancement. They don't get bonuses. It's a craft. And the industry's proud of that. Of all the years I was
a lot of polish in those buildings, and they only send you stuff on a really fancy paper.
Yeah, I mean, they're careful. And all the years I was a book packager, only one time did someone steal one of my ideas. Out of hundreds of books that I invented, only once did someone steal my idea. And that's because it's ladies and gentlemen making books for ladies and gentlemen. And so it couldn't be more different than Hollywood. And that's why we're not supposed to go hawk our stuff, because there must be something wrong with you.
But that's not the way it is anymore.
Well, it's a mess, because what you've got are particularly business authors who are figuring out how to game a system. You talked about the dagger on the bestseller list. You and I both know you can buy a slot on the New York Times bestseller list for $50,000, guaranteed. It doesn't mean anything to be on the bestseller list anymore, because if you care, you can just buy it. Well, the old book industry would never have wanted that. Why would you do that? Because it's ladies and gentlemen making books for ladies and gentlemen. But if you approach it like an industry, how am I going to game this? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? It loses such an impact, because good books that resonate with us, that spread from person to person, not because they were advertised on a billboard, but because they organically spread, that's one reason we have such a connection to them, is because it's real. It's not manipulated. And I've been in this industry a really long time. I've never bought a slot on a bestseller list. I've never sought to manipulate this or that, because then I should just go work for Goldman Sachs. This isn't about how do you make a profit. It's how do you make a difference.
You know, I think it was last year, the year before, Brent Underwood, who works with Ryan Holiday on a company called Brass Check, Ryan Holiday, marketing author, published a book with no innards digitally called My Foot. And he took a picture of his foot. Again, like I said, there's no innards. There was no writing in the book at all, but he uploaded it to Amazon in some very obscure categories that no one was uploading it to, like, I'm going to make it up, like inset legs or whatever, right? And then, of course, it ratchets to number one because he texted 8 friends to buy a copy, and there's no one else to compete with. And so he has a screenshot and a beautiful article saying, here's how you game the number one Amazon bestseller ranking, which people are starting to use as a thing. Like, I'm number one Amazon bestseller, and here's how you do it in a category, not number one on the total ranking. And that is interesting subversion, because of course what happens when I read the article is that my trust goes down in all of the stuff.
Right. Exactly. And so if my stated goal is to build trust, not just in me, but in institutions that care, everyone's a hypocrite, but I'm not enough of a hypocrite to then turn around and say, well, the ends justify the mean. How am I going to hype stuff? So I didn't suggest Linchpin because I want to sell copies of Linchpin, because what listeners may not realize is that when you and I sell one more book, we probably get zero because the advance hasn't been earned out. Or if we do get a royalty check, it's nickels and dimes. It's not dollars. Mm-hmm. So we're not getting paid to do this. We're doing this because we care about the idea. So in the case of Linchpin, what happened was I sold my book packaging company so I could focus on my internet company. I sold my internet company, so I was done. It was 1998, 99. And I was literally done. I had finally made it so that I didn't have to worry about how I was going to make a living next month or next year. And I had accomplished what I set out to accomplish. When I worked at Yahoo, the last project the project that I started before they bought my company and that came out when I was at Yahoo was a book called Permission Marketing. Mm. And Permission Marketing was a brilliant idea. It was my idea. And I spent 10 years of my life building a company around it. And the book became a hit. And not only did the book become a hit, but because my editor, who's retired, he'd been at this a long time. He'd been Nabokov's editor. So that's like the arc of his career.
Nice.
But he was really busy and didn't really think much of me or the book. So he let me art direct the cover. And so the cover, which was a big deal in 98, 99, was not just my face, but my face in an artistic pose, which had never been done in a business book before. Right. And it's just from the nose up.
Oh, yeah, of course.
With me looking up.
Yeah, I'm looking around the room seeing if I can spot a copy of it.
Yeah,
I
just gave one away the other day.
As you describe it, I will. I immediately recall it because it was memorable, and also we'll put a picture of it in the notes of the show. So
here's this iconic image. So that means I must be famous, even though I wasn't, and a bestseller. And so I had a best-selling book last time out of the gate. I was done. And then what happened was, a bunch of personal things kicked in and I was just in a black hole again. What am I going to do now? What's next? And I didn't write anything because why would I write another book? I had my bestseller. I was done. Yeah. Right after all those years, I finally did it.
No dagger needed.
And Malcolm Gladwell sent me a copy of The Tipping Point to write a blurb. And this is the only time blurbing has ever paid off for me. He sent me at the galley of The Tipping Point. No one knew who Malcolm was.
Yeah.
And I instantly gave him a blurb. But then I woke up the next morning and realized that I had spent a year writing a book in my head without knowing it. And I typed Unleashing the Idea Virus in the next 12 days. It took 12 days to write that book. Just like Jack Kerouac without the speed. And I finished it and I sent it to Malcolm and I said, look, you unlocked this, but might feel like I stole the tipping point. So I don't want to publish this book if you think I stole your book, because my book was going to come out before his, because I was going to self-publish it, right? And he was super generous and wrote the foreword for the book Unleashing the Idea Virus. So now I had my book and his foreword, and I went to my traditional publisher, and they said, yeah, we'll publish it, but in a year, and you can't give it away for free. But this was when I had adopted my digital first mindset. So I said, I can't be that much of a hypocrite. So I just posted the book for free.
With his forward in it.
With his forward in it, Unleashing the Idea Virus. And it got downloaded millions of times. At the time, it was the most popular ebook ever published because I was early. And then I said, whoa, we should make a hardcover edition of this because people want to read it on paper. So we self-published that. So now I had two dots, permission marketing and Unleashing the Idea Virus.
And I missed the one connection point between how did reading The Tipping Point give you the impetus?
Because the tipping point is about how ideas spread. And Unleashing the Idea Virus is about how ideas spread. But his book was academic and thoughtful, and my book was a blur and tactical and internet. It was internet.
Gotcha. Same some root.
Same root.
Maybe
but,
same patina.
But clearly, I had been thinking about it because you can't write a book like Unleashing the Idea Virus in 12 days unless you've been really paying attention for a year. And I thought, oh, I'm an author now. And
because two dots on a graph.
And so I liked that pace. Spend a year thinking, typing, writing, and then there's the frantic 2 weeks of publication, and then you go back to your day job. And so I became Seth Godin, the author, after that book. And my books were not about me, and they were about the reader to the extent that the reader could make change using my ideas, right? That you could use permission marketing, the purple cow, free prize inside, Unleashing the Idea Virus to help move your project forward. And I have notes from people who founded some of the biggest, most profitable companies in the world saying they founded it because they read my book.
Wow.
And that makes me really happy.
That's huge. That's
right?
massive.
Really, yeah. I mean, big organizations, because they figured out that they couldn't build Heinz and they couldn't build Procter & Gamble, but they could build these other kinds of organizations. So that was
the Jones Soda metaphor you use in the book.
Which one?
You use this great Jones Soda
example. Exactly. And so step by step, that's what I did for a dozen books or maybe more. And then I wrote a book called The Dip, which is about quitting.
Loved it.
Thank you.
Michael Bungay Stanier gave me a metaphor for that book, which is the longer you hold your breath underwater, the more interesting place you come up. Wow. Yeah. I wish I could just take credit for that line now that I've said it, but it's Michael Bungay Stanier over coffee in Toronto when I was going through a dip. And he said, have you read The Dip? I said, no. He said, let me give you a metaphor for it. And I looked for that metaphor throughout the entire book. It was nowhere to be found.
No.
And I texted him, I'm like, did you just make up that line? I tweeted it. It got a lot of retweets. And he's like, yeah, that was pure MB. That was me. And he didn't even realize it was a good line. And now he's got you just gave me a thumbs up. I'm going to tell him.
Yeah, I'm a fan.
Okay.
So then I realized something that Zig had realized 25 years before, which is when you're standing on stage, when you're writing, it doesn't matter how good your idea is. If people don't believe, if people don't care, your idea is not going to go anywhere. Because again, it's not engineering. I'm not describing the tensile strength of aluminum. I am describing something that could happen if you did it. And the feedback I was getting from the world was either I did it, it worked, thank you, or I didn't do it because I'm afraid, because I'm stuck, because I don't think it's my turn, etc. And over the course of those couple years, I realized my mission is not to help the world sell more stuff. We got enough stuff. Selling more stuff is not interesting to me. My mission, and I think it's always been my mission, it was just hiding, was to help people become who they seek to become, to cause the culture to become better in the way they seek to make it better, to help people help themselves go to where they want to go. And I had earned enough trust with my publisher by this point that when I said to Adrian, I want to write this book, and it's sort of a disorganized concept, but it's at the heart of what happens when industrialism goes away. He didn't hesitate. he just said, go, do it. So then I sat down with this blank sheet of paper and I'm like, well, how do I do this different than Zig? How do I do this without it being my story? Because I don't want to tell my story. It's not helpful to say to people, I did this, be me.
That's your teacher guru.
Yeah.
That you've talked about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You want to be a teacher, not a guru.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
And because I measure myself by what the people I teach others.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if I'm a guru, they can't teach anybody anything.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm a teacher, I can teach them to teach what I'm teaching. So then I started reading and reading and reading. And I discovered Lewis Hyde. Why didn't anyone tell me about Lewis Hyde? He wrote a book called The Gift. Mm-hmm. That's spectacular and more researched and nuanced and calm than I could write in my whole life. And then I found a book by a friend named Ben Zander and his wife Roz called The Art of Possibility. Why didn't anyone tell me about The Art of Possibility? Another breakthrough. And finally...
Is that the Boston Orchestra?
Exactly.
Right.
And then finally, The War of Art by Steve Pressfield, now a dear friend. And I sat in this room, no one was here at the time, and I said at the top of my voice, why hadn't I been informed? How is it that this book on this topic has been in the world for years and no one told me? And I seriously thought about not writing my book and just devoting a year of my life to telling people about that book.
And there was no 3 Books podcast for you to download
Exactly.
a good curated list.
And instead, I reached out to Steve, and Steve's a mention, a super guy. I took his work. I took The Art of Possibility. I took The Gift. I took Marcel Duchamp. I took my mom's work at the Albright Knox Contemporary Art Museum in Buffalo. I took my dad's work running an enlightened factory. And certainly Tom Peters and a little Jay Levinson and a lot of what Roz had to say in Art of Possibility. And I said, no one's ever put all this stuff together. And the only way I could do it was by creating my own experience first and talking to myself honestly about what I was for. What am I trying to do here? Because saying I don't want to be measured on whether you made a profit from reading this book.
Help people sell more stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But how do I do that without being a hypocrite? Because that was a big shift to say, I don't care how many copies of Linchpin I sell. I honestly don't. How do I write the book that I want to write that captures the art as I see it? Because I believe if other people engage with it, they will see what I saw. And that, you said 2010, so it was 8 years ago.
Yeah.
That's all I've been doing for 8 years. It's the same thing. If you look at the 8 years before that, it was boom, 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 boom. And now it's just this. It's art is a real thing. It's not painting. It's different. And that everyone has told a joke once in their life that was funny. Everyone has helped someone who needed help once. Everyone has put out an idea into the world that might not work. So if you can do it once, you're a genius, because you either are or you aren't. And Einstein only did like 5 amazing things. So 1 is almost there. And if you can do it once, you could probably do it twice. And if you could do it regularly, you can be an artist. And that's my pitch. And that's the writing the book made me believe this.
And it sounds like it also in your mind, and maybe many of your readers, formed not a wall, but a change in all the stuff that came before it and all the stuff that came after it. And I've heard you describe that beautifully just now. Is there a sentence you use to describe that shift, or is it just the art metaphor that you just shared?
Well, the shift is I still teach and admire and love the stuff that came before. Okay. I don't deny any of it.
Okay, that's a good clarification. Yeah.
There's zero Ayn Rand in anything I have ever written.
Ayn Rand.
Yeah, there's nothing of selfishness, of hustle, of get it before the other guy gets it.
Gotcha.
Zero.
Okay.
That permission marketing is as anti-spam as a concept can be.
Gotcha.
I got kicked out of the Direct Marketing Association for writing that book. For 5 years, the Direct Marketing Association would not let me speak at their events because permission marketing so undermined their philosophy that attention is for the taking. And it was thrilling a few years ago when they put me in the Hall of Fame of the Direct Marketing Association because they let me back.
And I've noticed that often in your bio.
Yeah.
So you're saying, hey, even the older work is not something I deny, or there's no Ayn Rand and there's no selfishness, but still, Linchpin was a formative change.
Yeah, exactly.
Towards art and beauty. And it's a lovely book, which I'm ashamed to admit I had not read before, but was so touched by it. And there's so many themes in all three of these books. One thing I thought, it's a kind of a micro question, Seth, and we're going to kind of veer towards the ending here. There's a line in your acknowledgments, and you say, I'm see if I can pull that up at the exact time I say it, but you say, to people who read acknowledgments, you know who you are. And in my acknowledgments of, passing it over to you now for people who hear a couple bumps, in my acknowledgments of the Book of Awesome, I say, to people who are reading this sentence, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. I say that in my acknowledgement, and there's like, we both have this self-aware acknowledgments, and I've seen similar things in other acknowledgments. What is up with that point? Who reads acknowledgments? What are acknowledgments for? Do you flip to them like I do when you open a book? What are you trying to glean from them? Can you just go in a little mini Seth rant on acknowledgments for me?
I love writing the acknowledgments, and I'm so lucky. I have been so fortunate, and so many people have gone out of their way to help me. If mentioning someone's name in the acknowledgments helps them even a tiny little bit, it's so cheap and so fun, and it puts a smile on my face. And I think what happened there was I realized that it was selfish of me to even spend a page on the acknowledgments because almost no one else who's not in the acknowledgments was going to read them except for the people in the acknowledgments. So basically I was giving a hat tip to other people and say, thank you for letting me take a page of the book. And if you were looking for your name here it is.
And my favorite line of your acknowledgments, by the way, although I love that one I do be talking about, is to Chris Anderson. And then you say to the other Chris Anderson. And I love that because I'm like, I'm assuming the Ted Chris Anderson and I'm assuming the Chris Anderson who wrote The Long Tail will probably think they're the first Chris Anderson. Am I right in thinking, like, who's the other one? There's no spelling difference. That is so funny to me. I don't know if that's just a Neil thing or that's just what you meant. I so want to get to the close because on time, but there's
it's okay. We can.
Okay, you're okay. There's one anecdote in Linchpin that really stuck with me, and you say in the book that it stuck with you too. You talk about how you were taking a flight home, but it got grounded in Albany on the way to New York City, and they announced that the delay was going to be somewhere between an hour and a half and like.
And it was already 10 o'clock at night. That's an important factor.
And like ultimately maybe overnight, right? Like that, up to 5 or 6 hours or more. And you share how you on the plane rented a car to make the 2-hour drive to Hastings-On-Hudson. And you got up on the plane. I love the brazenness here. And you said, I'm driving to New York. It will take 2 hours. I can take up to 3 people and it's totally free. Who would like to come? And in the story, you say, no one joined me. And I've thought about that a lot.
Actually, this was the closing story of my keynote speech for 5 years.
I did not know that.
And the next thing you did not know either, which is, and when I tell the story, I put in something to honor Zig every time. When Zig gave his talks, and he was amazing on stage, at least once a talk, he would get down on one knee. And he would do it because it's another way to make it a point as opposed to just raising your voice. So right there in that part of the story, I say, and nobody raised their hand, and I get down on one knee. And in that moment, I'm paying tribute to Zig. So it's really, wow, that we only have 3 books on the table, and you picked that one line that I do to honor Zig. And
Zig, of course, is in the acknowledgments as well.
Yeah. And so the punchline of the story is I spent the whole ride home thinking about this. Was it my tie? Was it my presentation style? Why didn't anyone want to come with me?
I know marketing stuff, and right? I did not market the three seats.
And just as I pulled into the parking lot at the airport of White Plains where my car was, I realized what the problem was. And the problem was this. If you raise the hand and get off the plane, it's your fault. But if you stay on the plane, it's United Airlines' fault. And we have raised our children to want it to be United Airlines' fault. So we stay on the plane. And my hope what I'm begging people to do is get off the plane, because it's not going where you want it to go anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so much easier to get off the plane now that it's hard to remember 20 years ago, you couldn't have emailed me for a blurb. That 20 years ago, we would never have met. That the connection of this economy, it's not about, can you get something cheaper than you could yesterday? Because we've already explored that. It's over. We're not going to be able to lower the price of a stuffed animal by another nickel. That everything on Amazon is as cheap as it's going to get. So where's value going to come from? It's going to come from being trusted, from connection, from innovation, from people who get off the plane.
What an incredible way to end our conversation about those 3 specific books. I have a few closing questions, though. Fast money round.
Ready?
Okay.
Is there money involved?
There is no money.
Because this whole thing is a free transaction.
Exactly. I was thinking of Family Feud. I grew up with the Ray Combs, and it's like, can you put 20 seconds on the clock, please? Although the first few podcasts I recorded, people got freaked out when I said that, so I stopped saying that. A few of them are the ones I always do, and then there's a couple that are you specific.
Bring it on.
Okay. All these books are about mind. They're all about brain. They're all about how to see the world. They're all about lenses, getting on top of fears. We live in a mind economy. We live in an increasingly valuable part of the economy where brains are important. What do you do to get out of your head?
I guess the 2 simple personal answers are going for a walk or swimming and listening to jazz.
Fantastic. How do you organize your books? And I say that being ensconced in your books.
It's a controversial topic, and I'll tell you why. When I was a book packager, I had 10 employees, 3 women who ran the organization with me, but there were 10. And I very, very much wanted to organize the books by height. I remember books by height. If you ask me where a book is, I won't be able to tell you, but I can tell you exactly how tall it is.
That's hilarious.
And if they were organized by height, I could find anything.
When you say by height, you mean like shortest to tallest?
Yeah, shortest to tallest.
Okay.
First of all, it'd be visually cool. But second, and you'd know where to put anything back when you were done.
That's true.
Easy in, easy out.
I mean, presumably some are the same, but then you just have to have a subcategorization.
Within the tie,
okay.
It's okay.
Okay.
And all 3 of them said I was being ridiculous, and they refused. And for whatever reason, because I'm bad at conflict, I said fine. So the order, random is really hard to accomplish, but it's pretty close to random. But I still know where most things are.
Oh, that's interesting. So as I look around this room right now, and I'm seeing, just to describe for listeners, these are shelves that are like 4 by 4, and each 4 box is like holding 20 books. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of these shelves. And if I stare at that shelf right now, you would say I would figure out no clear. Right. I mean, I'm looking behind you. There's the Zig Ziglar book I mentioned earlier, next to the Icarus Deception, next to What is Art. Yeah, so it's not an order. Random, as close to random as possible. Interesting. Okay. I won't push on that more, but I do think that the height thing still has some merit. It's not dissimilar to people doing it by color, and a lot of people do it by color. So especially
graphic designers.
And I was going to say like really trendy retail stores. What is your favorite bookstore? It could exist now or may not exist anymore. And why do you like going in there?
I have to pick the bookstore at the Albright Knox in Buffalo. My mom started the entire idea of museum stores having stores that were bigger than postcards.
Oh,
and she began it with a bookstore. And that's where I discovered Marcel Duchamp. And that's where I discovered Seeing is Forgetting the Name of What One Sees, which is a book by Robert Irwin in the early 60s. Contemporary art happened really fast. Marcel Duchamp, some people say, was the last artist because he figured out the joke, he explored the joke, can't do anything. Mic drop after that. And I love, what Amazon spoiled for me is I want any bookstore I walk into to instantly reorganize itself based on my preferences, because that's what Amazon does, right? And when they don't do that, I get frustrated. I like books like the stores like the Strand and Powell's. However, the nooks and crannies I'm not exploring enough to know where to look next.
Right.
So I tend to end up at the cash register for what's new because I know what's old, and that's not fun. Across the street is the Galapagos bookstore, which has books in a bunch of different languages. In my tiny little town, we used to have 6 bookstores. And I like the people at Galapagos, and I try to buy books from them now and then.
Great name.
Yeah.
Right next to, is that Clockwork Orange I saw?
Yes.
Clockwork Orange Records?
Vinyl store, yes.
Oh, you've got everything you need right outside your door.
I'm telling you,
I'm starting to understand why you're here.
And the best gluten-free, dairy-free bakery is right down the street. I brought you some snacks for when we're done. Don't let me forget.
Fantastic. Is that your wife's bakery?
Yes.
Oh my gosh,
by
I can't
the
wait.
way.
Thank you. What is your white whale book, or the book that's either been on your to-read list the longer, or, as another one of my guests said, has defeated you?
I only took 1 English class in college. My high school English teacher wrote in my yearbook that I was the bane of her existence, that I would never amount to anything.
You got to be kidding me.
Nope.
Wrote that in your yearbook.
I dedicated a book to her later. Anyway, I haven't read any of the stuff I'm supposed to read. Never mind Moby Dick, Middlemarch, books that everyone say are super important, formative, magical works of literature. I get 2 or 3 pages in and I just go, ah. And my attention span won't let me. So maybe one day I will either sit through the audio or push myself to do it. But part of what's happened in the last 15 years of getting too many books sent to me is you can now read a nonfiction book in an area you'll understand, and in 8 pages get the joke. You understand what the book is trying to teach you. Now, if it's making a big promise and it's keeping it, you can read the whole thing. But if you say, oh, I already understand where this fits in the grid, you can stop. And so a lot of that joy of discovery for nonfiction has gone away from me. On the other hand, when Kevin Kelly shows up with a new book, What Technology Wants, if you haven't read it, it will completely rewire your brain.
Haven't read it. Haven't read The Inevitable, if that's his newest one.
The Inevitable's right over there. Yeah. But I also love light fiction. Robin Sloan's last 2 books are great. Max Barry's book, Syrup, the best novel about marketing ever written.
Interesting. But you talked about the classics, and you said, but you also, they aren't white whales in the sense that you don't want to read. Like, you don't craving them. There's no book that you're like, I must read that before I die. You're not.
And then I would.
You don't hold that. Yeah, I love that. You don't hold that. Because we talk a lot on the show about having no book guilt, having no book shame, if someone's formative book is 50 Shades of Grey, so be it. We're not going to judge that person.
We can judge that person. We won't judge anybody else.
But that's what I'm trying to get rid of, is this feeling that people can. Because I think the one thing that's plaguing the book industry is this idea that we got to all pretend that we're reading smarter stuff than we are. And I get told by my publisher, by the way, I noticed you have one of my favorite books down, the Dimitri Martin.
Oh, he's so funny.
That is an incredible book, which I believe is right next to the happiness equation. They tell me I should write up more. My publishers tell me I should write up more.
Because publishers love that, because they're not commercial. I'm thrilled that that's the way they think, because a race to the bottom is nobody's friend. But we also know that if your goal is to sell 1 million books, The 1 Minute Manager is a better book to write than Thriving on Chaos, which had, I don't know, Tom probably put 40 times as many words in it as are in The 1 Minute Manager.
Interesting. And it sold, I'm assuming, far less copies.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Who Moved My Cheese and so on. Side note, I took a ride with the best ever rated Uber driver in my life. He had a 4.99 rating. I have a screenshot of it. I can show it to you. I thought, okay, he's only given like 50 rides or whatever. No, he's given over 5,000. His name is Vishwas. I asked him about it, and I won't do his accent. He's just come from India. He was a executive at a telecommunications company over there. He said, it's not a driving job. Okay, maybe I will, because I grew up in India. And I'm
You're
like,
allowed.
It's not the driving job. It is a service job. It is a service. People don't understand. It's a service. I said, hey, you got a 4.99 rating. How do you do it? He said, it's all about books. I'm having him on the show, and Who Moved My Cheese is one of his 3 most formative books. There's a tease. There's a question I have been longing to ask you, and I have been longing to ask you this for so long.
Wait, but the book packager in me wants you to do a book with him. Will you do a book with him?
Oh, tell me more. What are you thinking?
Well, the name of the book is The World's Best Uber Driver. That's the subtitle.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
And just like 50 lessons from The World's Best Uber Driver. 4.99. Maybe it's called 4.99.
Oh, that's a great title. I have the screenshot. I'm going to show it to you after we hit stop.
As a customer service thing, because what you could do is you could go to companies that want better customer service and sell them the books by the barrel.
By the way, put that guy in the station, not me, because he is captivating.
There you go.
Oh my gosh, I was leaving the bar by myself, and I told people, and they were like, "What?" I was showing people, they're like rating. I'm like, "Look at this guy's rating."
One of my specialties is naming books. If somebody, when successful people come to me, I do, because I don't do any consulting, but if they want friendly advice, naming their book is one of my specialties.
You know what's funny? You say
but
that.
I never take credit for after the book comes out.
Yeah.
But there's a few books in the world that I've done.
You won't reveal?
No.
Okay. Because one of the greatest gifts you gave me, and gift giving is a big part of Linchpin, is an email I sent you 3 years ago where I said to you, after you had graciously blurbed the happiness equation, I had said to you, Seth, I'm really struggling because all the covers that my publisher sends me, I don't like them, but it's their right according to the contract to own it, not me. And I pushed back on this one, I pushed back on this one, I pushed back so many times. I'm burning bridges. And you know what you did? Do you remember what you did?
Yeah.
You replied that night with a number of new versions of my cover you designed yourself and sent to me as a gift. It was touching.
It was a privilege, a pleasure.
And the last question I want to ask you, this question I've been trying to ask you and wanting to ask you for so long, is I get the sense from listening to you and reading about you that you are an incredible father. And I know that this is not about you. I know that this show is not about you, and I know it's about books. But I get the sense about when you talk about your speaking pricing strategy, about making it more expensive to travel further away. I get the sense when you talk about cooking at home and making this perfect hummus that you make with your family. And I've heard you talk about love, and I've heard you talk about beauty, and I've heard you talk about art and the bakery. And there's so much inside you, I sense. If I have it right, you have 2 sons. Is that right?
Yeah, but I don't talk about them.
You don't talk about them?
It's their life, not mine.
Yeah, and I have 2 sons. I'm trying to figure out balance. I'm trying to figure out how to take all the work I'm doing and make that work with my family. And so my closing question with respecting what you shared is, how do someone who's listening both take a piece of advice or two from you, and for those listening who are like me, also learn how to operate as you do as a whole person, which is the whole person part that I'm hinting at, because it's the part I.
So let me try only one little thing, and I'm not an expert, but I'll tell you this. Work-life balance is a trap. There's just life. And you don't get to say, I'm at work, so I'm not alive. Or I'm alive, I'm not at work. When we are in an industrial economy where you are paid by the hour to move a widget from one place to another, hours equal income. But if we live in an economy based on connection and trust and art, and on doing work that matters, if you can find the bravery and persistence to find better clients, to do more important work, to make a bigger impact, the number of hours you spend isn't the point. It's how far out of the boat are you willing to lean. And so I think if we start with an abundance mindset, not a scarcity mindset, and realize that, yes, we have to make a living, but we don't have to win, that it's possible to weave a life that you don't want to escape from, that you can do work that makes you uncomfortable, do work that requires bravery, do work that requires extraordinary generosity, and still have a life. That the trap is believing that all you can do is what you're currently doing, and that you need more, that you need more money, that you need more status, that you need more prestige. But I think that's a trap that was created by people who sell money, status, and prestige. And you don't have to buy it if you don't want it. So I could give you a long list of the stuff I didn't do over the last 20 years, because a lot of doors open when people like you and I write books. But I'm super proud of those things that I didn't do, because I got a life instead, and that's better.
You don't have to win, you just have to live. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, sir. You're very generous.
Wow, that was an incredible episode with Seth Godin. It's just me again, just Neil. I got to tell you guys, my brain was just completely broadened by that conversation. I actually got up from Seth's office. We sort of chit-chatted for a bit. He brought me some cookies and some baking from his wife's bakery in Hastings-On-Hudson, which was delicious and so gracious of him. And as I was leaving his office, I noticed the oven was on. And I was like, the oven is on, why? And I turned around and he's like, I make lunch for everybody every day. I mean, he's got a couple people that work with him. He makes lunch for everybody every day with an oven. I mean, it isn't no just macaroni and cheese in the microwave. It's lunch in an oven. He's like, well, I got to eat what I like. And he sort of smiled sheepishly. And I thought, this guy is really practicing what he preaches. I mean, the fact that he gave me this interview without even having a podcast launched. I mean, I asked him before there was anything to even see. And what he says in Linchpin is true. Like, he puts himself out there. He puts his beauty out there. He puts his art out there. And I think you saw that reflected in this incredible conversation. So I know when I walked out onto the snowy streets of Hastings-on-Hudson again in above New York City, I just felt so energized, and I hope you feel the same way. And now, if you've made it here to the end of the podcast, I want to invite you. You already have. You've basically joined. You are now part of the End of the Podcast Club. This is the club for the people who make it to the end of our podcast. Not everybody's going to make it this far. I mean, it's a show. It's a conversation. We're going to do 333 episodes over years with 1,000 formative books discussed. This is a mountain, okay? This is not something you just do. It's something that you work on. It's a practice. So not everybody's going to make it this far. But if you made it here, you are part of the End of the Podcast Club. I am hereby inviting you to call me. I'm going to give you my phone number. It is 1-833-READ-A-LOT. That's 1-833-READALOT. Call me at 1-833-READ-A-LOT. Leave me your feedback on this conversation. Leave me a review on iTunes and tell me what you wrote so I can read it on the next show. Tell me what you would have answered for one of the questions I asked, how it would have been differently. If you can keep your replies short to a minute or less, I would love to start seeing if we could play a couple here at the end of the podcast, in the End of the Podcast Club. And so let's do that. Let's go to the phones. We got a lot of voicemails over the last few weeks. Here's one that I really enjoyed.
Hi, Neil. This is Tracy from San Diego, and I just listened to your first podcast for 3 books, and I loved it. It was just fascinating listening to you and Leslie from your basement. I really enjoyed your banter and the candidness of your conversation and her very direct and interesting questions. I wanted to share with you 2 books that made a huge impact on me that were, I would consider, 2 of my favorites in life. One was Charlotte's Web, which I read as a child and just loved it. I was a huge reader as a kid, and it was one of my favorites. And then another one that I really enjoyed as an adult was Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, which I think was the first nonfiction book that really spoke to me and I found fascinating. So keep up the good work. Can't wait to listen to the next podcast.
Thank you so much to Tracy from San Diego. How fitting that you're in San Diego. I feel like San Diego is becoming a little bit of a heart center for 3 books because I recorded the chapter 2 with Frank Warren there. You're calling from there, and I have a friend named Fred who lives down there. And when he moved there, I was like, why San Diego? Why did you choose San Diego? And he's like, you know what? I triangulated like 17 different types of data on where the best place to live is in the entire United States. It was like, cost of living combined with like number of days of sun combined with like access to water and, all these different like taxes and everything. And he's like, San Diego is the best place to live. It has 360 days of sunshine a year. It's always beautiful weather and it's beautiful. So every time I hear anyone calling me from San Diego, I feel like I'm mentally there, and I love that. Charlotte's Web. What a classic. I was looking at it the other day. I was like, do we read that to my son who's now 4 years old? Do we kind of read that book to him? And like, I don't know if you remember, but in the very first chapter of Charlotte's Web, the dad is heading out to slaughter the pigs. So it's like the very first thing, and I'm a bit torn because I don't like censoring any books from children, and that's an interesting topic. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, what books and when do you expose kids to books? I don't know. But I was like, do I really want to talk about pig slaughtering on page 1 with a little kid? So I held off on Charlotte's Web. Maybe I'll get some hate mail for that. But I'm going to save that for my son until he gets a little bit older. And The Tipping Point, a classic. By the way, if anyone knows Malcolm Gladwell and can help me convince him to be on 3 Books, we would love that, because as I keep asking people, who would you want on? Malcolm Gladwell keeps coming up, and he's an Ontarian like me. He's a Canadian like me. He grew up away from Toronto and kind of in the suburbs like me. Unlike me, he's a prominent New Yorker writer who's written 5 or more bestsellers like The Tipping Point and Blink and Outliers, and really transformed. I think we heard that in your voicemail, Tracy, kind of how a lot of people interpret nonfiction. It's not just dry and boring and laden and footnotes and endnotes and blah, 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 and academic this and academic that. It's like beautiful and fun and interesting to read, like a story with a huge counterintuitive point at the end of each chapter. Like, wow, what a trailblazer. So Malcolm Gladwell is on our dream list for 3 Books, and we really hope to have him on. Thank you so much for your call. And I said last chapter we're going to play, or I'm going to read a sample review that you guys leave for me on iTunes. It's hard to get reviews when you launch a new show, and it's an important thing because it's how people discover the show and it affects all the rankings and stuff. But if you leave a review and I read it on the air, then we will mail you a free signed copy of any of my books. Or if you happen to want a different book, let us know. We'll do our best to get it. Maybe one of the books that we talked about on the show today. But we do have signed copies of my books at least, so we can send that to you. Here is the review of the chapter. It comes from Secret Guy 21. The title is Book Lovers Will Love ... with 5 stars. This is a really intriguing review for a few reasons. Okay, it says, look, Neil is a friend of mine, so I'm a believer in all he does. But I can tell you this, if you like books, you'll love the appreciation and enthusiasm shown to the written word in 3 Books. Don't judge a podcast by its cover. Listen, and you'll be a believer too. Thank you, Secret Guy 21. The funniest part, there's 2 funny things in here for me. One is I have no idea who this is. So it says, look, Neil's a friend of mine. Who is it? Who is the secret guy? And the fact that I presume his pseudonym is Secret Guy means I may never know. But by saying he's kind of the review of the chapter, I hope that he emails us so we uncover his identity at least. The second thing that's funny to me is it says, don't judge a podcast by its cover, which of course I take as a horrible insult on our 3 Books logo. So we put a ton of time, energy, and money into this logo, and I can't now tell if Secret Guy 21 likes it or not. Either way, I hope you maybe do judge a book or judge a podcast by its cover, and I hope you like the cover. But either way, Secret Guy 21, your review made me laugh. I have no idea who you are. Thank you for the review of the chapter. If you loved what you heard and you want to kind of stay in touch with me and with Seth, check us out online, Instagram, Facebook, anything that you want. It's at Neil Pasricha. That's NeilPasricha. And of course, everything we talked about, all the blog posts, the show notes, everything for the entire show is at 3books.co. Again, the entire home of this podcast is 3books.co. That's the number 3, BOOKS.co. 3books.co. I'll see you there. Until next time, you are what you eat and you are what you read. Take care.